5 days before the World Cup opens in Los Angeles, the cooks and dishwashers at SoFi Stadium voted 96% to authorize a strike because they are afraid of being arrested while serving hot dogs. Iran is signing $25 billion deals with Russia to build nuclear reactors, with the same Russia that Trump rejected as a uranium custodian, while simultaneously offering Washington a verbal commitment to never pursue nuclear weapons. And the prediction market tracking whether the Iran war ends has moved the June 7th probability from 72% to 6%, not because negotiations collapsed, but because Trump said he hadn't signed yet. All three of these stories are about the same thing. They are all about what happens when a system is being run on announcement rather than action, when the performance of doing something has been separated from the doing of it. Let's take them apart, because this week produced a specific fact that makes everything the administration has said about nuclear negotiations look significantly different. On June 4th, at an online conference in Moscow titled Russian-Iranian Cooperation in a Changing World, Iran's ambassador to Russia, Qasem Jalali, highlighted the progress of what he called the most extensive nuclear cooperation project ever launched between Tehran and Moscow. The project is centered on the Hormoz nuclear power plant in Hormozgan province, across the Gulf from the UAE and Oman, to be developed by Iran's private sector in partnership with Russia's state nuclear energy corporation, ROSATOM. The price tag, a $25 billion memorandum of understanding signed in 2025, before the current round of US-Iran peace negotiations, covering the construction of 4 Generation 3 reactors with a combined output of 5,020 megawatts. Iran International confirmed the details: 4 new units in Sirik, Hormozgan province, with construction targets advancing from planning into implementation. Alongside Hormoz, Jalali confirmed that the second and third units of the Bucher nuclear power plant are under construction. He also highlighted joint work on small-scale nuclear power plants in further cooperation with ROSATOM. Now hold that against what is happening in the US-Iran negotiations. The draft MOU includes a commitment from Iran to never pursue nuclear weapons and to negotiate over the suspension of uranium enrichment and the removal of its highly enriched uranium stockpile. Trump has said explicitly and repeatedly that Russia cannot hold Iran's uranium. He rejected Russia as a custodian for the specific reason that Russia is not a neutral party. It has provided Iran with modest military and intelligence assistance during the war, and it opposes U.S. sanctions against Iran. Trump's position is that the uranium goes to the U.S., or gets destroyed, or goes to Kazakhstan, not Russia. Iran's position, as demonstrated by this week's conference in Moscow, is that Russia is its primary nuclear partner, not a former partner, a current active $25 billion partner. While Iranian negotiators are in Doha, offering Washington verbal commitments about nuclear weapons, Iran's ambassador to Moscow is publicly celebrating the expansion of nuclear infrastructure, with the country Trump specifically said could not be trusted to hold the material that makes those weapons possible. Planet Labs satellite imagery from January 30th, 2026, shared via Reuters, shows a new roof being installed over a previously destroyed building at the Natanz nuclear site. Natanz was among the facilities struck in the February 28 attacks. The building is being rebuilt. Iran is not standing still while these negotiations proceed. It is rebuilding the facilities that were bombed, signing $25 billion in new nuclear construction deals, and hosting academic conferences in Moscow about expanding its nuclear partnership with Russia, simultaneously with offering the U.S. a verbal promise not to make weapons. The civilian nuclear energy framing is Iran's standard defense, and it has been for 30 years. Iran's enrichment capability has always been described as civilian. Iran's centrifuge programs have always been described as civilian. The 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%, a short technical step from weapons grade, has been described as civilian. The question is not what Iran calls it. The question is what Iran is doing while the ceasefire holds. What Iran is doing is building. What Iran is building is infrastructure that makes a weapons program faster, cheaper, and harder to eliminate at any future moment. calling it civilian power generation, is the diplomatic equivalent of rebuilding a warship in dry dock during a ceasefire and describing the work as routine maintenance. Trump's MOU is asking Iran to verbally commit to not pursue nuclear weapons, then negotiate over what to do about a stockpile that sits beneath rubble, while Iran's ambassador stands in Moscow celebrating a $25 billion deal with the country Trump rejected as a custodian for that same material. This is two countries conducting parallel diplomatic performances while each pursues its actual strategic interests on a different track. Now the World Cup, because what is happening at SoFi Stadium right now is one of the cleanest illustrations of the year of how two administration policies, each internally coherent, have combined to produce an incoherence that could stop one of the most watched sporting events on the planet. Yesterday, the workers at SoFi Stadium, nearly 2,000 cooks, dishwashers, concession workers, bartenders, and servers represented by Unite Here, Local 11, voted 96% to authorize a strike. The vote was not primarily about wages, though wages are part of it. The central demand is this: a guarantee that immigration and customs enforcement agents will be barred from the stadium on match days. Worker Yolanda Fierro explained it to CBS News directly. The main concern, first of all, is the ICE issue being on the grounds. DHS Secretary Markwayne Mullin told Fox News that ICE and other federal agencies would be present at the matches, but not for immigration, for terrorist threats. That answer is not reassuring to a workforce that has watched the Trump administration conduct 18 months of aggressive deportation operations and repeatedly redefine the scope of enforcement in ways that expanded beyond original public statements. DHS Acting Assistant Secretary Lauren Biss, in a statement to NPR on Saturday, did not confirm whether agents would be conducting immigration enforcement at the games. The answer to a direct question about immigration enforcement at a sporting event was not yes and not no. It was silence dressed as a statement. The Trump administration has spent 18 months enforcing immigration law aggressively, broadly, and with minimal tolerance for safe zones or enforcement exceptions. Every employer, every institution, every worker in an undocumented heavy industry sector has been processing this environment for 18 months. Workers at SoFi Stadium are not making an irrational demand. They are making a demand based on the observable behavior of the administration whose enforcement apparatus will be physically present at their workplace. On the other side, the same administration has invested $846 million in World Cup security, formed a White House task force, described the tournament as a showcase for American hospitality and prosperity, and spent months promoting the United States as a host capable of managing the world's largest sporting event. Both of these things are simultaneously true: the aggressive enforcement posture and the showcase hospitality ambition. And they'd have collided in the food service section of SoFi Stadium 5 days before opening. Here is the operational problem that makes this more than a political story. FIFA requires strict pre-approved background checks for all stadium personnel. Legends Global, which manages hospitality services at SoFi, cannot simply replace 2,000 striking workers with a new crew by June 12th. The pre-approval process takes weeks. If workers walk off the job, food and beverage operations at a stadium hosting 70,000 fans for the U.S. team's World Cup opener go dark. Not reduced, dark. LA Mag confirmed this directly. Replacement workers would face massive delays due to FIFA's background check requirements, threatening to disrupt operations for the 70,000. 0-0 fans expected at the opening match. The administration's showcase event and the administration's enforcement posture are competing for the same physical space. Negotiations are scheduled to resume Monday. 5 days. One of these things will have to give. And then there is the number that tells you everything about how the Iran peace process is actually working. Polymarket, the prediction market platform, has been tracking the probability of a US-Iran permanent peace deal since the negotiations began. As of June 6th, $260 million in prediction market capital has traded on the question of when the deal gets done. On June 6th, the probability of a deal by June 7th, today, collapsed from 72% to 6%. Not because negotiations broke down, Not because a new military incident occurred. Not because either government issued a formal statement. The market moved because Trump publicly said the deal still needed his signature. Let me stay with that for a moment, because it is the most concise possible description of where this peace process actually is. A $260 million market tracking whether a war ends moved 66 percentage points overnight based on what one person said on social media. The entire diplomatic machinery, the Doha negotiations, the Qatar mediation, the Pakistan framework, the IAEA consultations, the Witkoff-Kushner back channels, the UN involvement, all of it produced a probability that tracks a truth social post, like a weather instrument tracks barometric pressure. The June 7th probability going from 72% to 6% is not a signal about the diplomatic process. It is a signal about the volatility of presidential communication. The market correctly identified that there is no diplomatic process producing a deal. There is a president who will or will not feel politically ready to sign on a given day. The probability moves with his readiness, not with verified mine removal, not with IAEA inspection schedules, not with Iranian parliamentary ratification, not with any of the substantive conditions that a real ceasefire agreement requires. Polymarket didn't create this situation. It just priced it accurately. What the market is telling you is that the people who have traded $260 million on this question believe that Iran peace is a single variable bet on Trump's political calculus on any given day, not a function of the cumulative diplomatic work of 2 governments and 5 mediating countries over 3 months of war. That is not what peace is supposed to be. Peace is supposed to be durable because it is built on verified conditions and mutual interest. What the current situation is, a ceasefire held together by a fictional MOU that nobody has signed, violated daily by both parties. Moving in probability as the president posts or doesn't post is not peace. It is a suspension of hostilities sustained by shared reluctance to acknowledge that neither side has gotten what it came for. Iran hasn't given up its uranium. The US hasn't achieved verified disarmament. The strait is still mined. The oil is still above $100 a barrel. The ceasefire is being violated by CENTCOM strikes and Iranian ballistic missiles every 72 hours. And the market tracks whether Trump will say the word signed before midnight. 3 stories, 1 week, 1 conclusion. The Iran deal is a diplomatic performance running parallel to an Iranian nuclear build-out. The World Cup is an American showcase running directly into American enforcement policy. And the peace process has been accurately modeled by a crypto prediction market as a single variable bet on presidential mood. The pattern this week isn't incompetence or malice. It is something more structural and harder to fix. A governing style that has optimized for announcement and confused it with achievement. An announcement that the deal is largely negotiated is not a negotiated deal. An announcement that ICE is present not for immigration is not a safe workplace. An announcement that America is hosting the world is not an America that has resolved what it does with the immigrants who serve that world its food. The gap between announcement and reality is not new in American politics. But rarely has it been this measurable, this documented, and this consequential. The prediction market prices it. The strike vote counts it. The satellite imagery photographs it. The question isn't whether the announcements will keep coming. They will. The question is when the distance between the announcement and the thing announced becomes impossible to sustain. This week, that distance is 66 percentage points on a probability chart. 96% of 2,000 workers voting yes, and 4 nuclear reactors being built in Hormoz with Russian money.